Hello friends and welcome. Today's episode is a fan suggestion from the most important person to me, Jay. Thank you, Jay, for your suggestion, and if anyone has a suggestion or a story, please let me know for a chance to be featured in a future episode. Now, let's get into the stories. For centuries, the ancestral Puebloans were a thriving ancient Native American culture that spanned the present-day Four Corners southwest region in the United States. They lived in a range of structures that included small family pit houses, grand pueblos, and cliff-sided dwellings for defense. These villages were accessible only by rope or through rock climbing. They had a complex network linking hundreds of communities and population centers across the Colorado Plateau. The ancestral Puebloans held a distinct knowledge of celestial sciences that found form and was an integral part of the community structure. All areas of the ancestral Puebloan homeland suffered from periods of drought and erosion from wind and water. Summer rain could be unreliable and produced destructive thunderstorms. While the amount of winter snowfall varied greatly, the ancestral Puebloans depended on the snow for most of their water. Snow melt allowed for germination of both wild and cultivated seeds in the spring. They also diverted smaller streams for irrigation. The ancestral Puebloan culture is known for their pottery, rock art, and unique architecture. The best preserved examples of the stone dwellings are now protected within several United States national parks. They are credited for painting barrier cannon-style pictographs in locations where the images were protected from the sun yet visible to the public, and one of the earliest use of graphical perspective where the largest figure appears to take on a three-dimensional representation known as the Holy Ghost panel in Horseshoe Canyon. During the 1200s, this advanced and thriving population just seemed to vanish. Their homes and belongings were abandoned. Scientists have had several theories on what may have happened to the ancestral Puebloans, but nothing had been scientifically conclusive. Theories discussed include global or regional climate change, prolonged drought, environmental factors like topsoil erosion or deforestation, hostility and warfare, religious or cultural change, and influence from Mesoamerican cultures. The current scholarly consensus is that the ancestral Puebloans responded to pressure from the Numic-speaking people moving onto the Colorado Plateau, as well as climate change that resulted in agricultural failures. Most modern Puebloans assert that ancestral Puebloans did not vanish as it is commonly portrayed. They said that the ancestral Puebloans migrated to areas in the southwest with more favorable rainfall and dependable streams. The oral history passed down claims that the majority of the ancestral Puebloans relocated to the northern Rio Grande region of northwest New Mexico and merged with various Puebloan people whose descendants still live in Arizona and New Mexico. Off the west coast of Scotland lies the Flannan Lighthouse near the highest point of Ellen Moor. The 75-foot lighthouse was constructed between 1895 and 1899. It was first lit on December 7, 1899. In 1925, the lighthouse became one of the first Scottish lights to receive communications from the shore by wireless telegraphy. Later, in the 1960s, the island's transport system was modernized, and on September 28, 1971, the lighthouse was automated. However, the Flannan Lighthouse is best known for the mysterious disappearance of its keepers in 1900. The lighthouse was manned by 3 men: Principal Lighthouse Keeper James Dockett, second assistant Thomas Marshall, and the occasional lighthouse keeper Donald MacArthur, with a rotating fourth man spending time on shore. On December 15, 1900, the steamer Arctur, on the passage from Philadelphia to Leith, noted in its log that the light was not operational in poor weather conditions. When the ship docked in Leith on December 18th, the sighting was passed to the Northern Lighthouse Board for investigation. The relief vessel, the lighthouse tender Hesperus, was unable to sail from Lewis as planned on December 20th due to adverse weather and did not reach the island until noon on December 26th. On arrival, the crew and the relief keeper found that the flagstaff had no flag. None of the usual provision boxes had been left on the landing stage for restocking, and none of the lighthouse keepers were there to welcome them ashore. Jim Harvey, the captain of Hesperus, attempted to reach them by blowing the ship's whistle and firing a flare, but was unsuccessful. A boat was launched and Joseph Moore, the relief keeper, was put ashore alone. He found the entrance to the compound and the main door both closed, the bed unmade, and the clocks unwound. Returning to the landing stage with this grim news, he went back to the lighthouse with Hesperus's second mate and a seaman. A further search revealed that the lamps had been cleaned and refilled, and a set of oilskins was found that suggested that one of the keepers had left the lighthouse without them. There was no sign of any of the keepers, neither inside the lighthouse nor anywhere on the island. Joseph and the 3 volunteer seamen were left on the island to attend the light, and Hesperus returned to Lewis. Captain Harvey sent a telegram to the Northern Lighthouse Board dated December 26, 1900, stating, "A dreadful accident had happened at the Flannans. 3 keepers, Dockett, Marshall, and the occasional, have disappeared from the island. The clocks were stopped and other signs indicated that the accident must have happened about a week ago. Poor fellows. They must have been blown over the cliff or drowned trying to secure a crane." On Ellen Moore, the men scoured every corner of the island for clues as to the fate of the keepers. They found that everything was intact at the east landing, but the west landing provided considerable evidence of damage caused by recent storms. A box at 108 feet above sea level had been broken and its contents strewn about. Iron railings were bent over. The iron railing by the path was wrenched out of its concrete, and a rock weighing more than a ton had been displaced. On top of the cliff, at more than 200 feet above sea level, turf had been ripped away as far as 33 feet from the cliff edge. On December 29th, Robert Moorhead, a Northern Lighthouse Board superintendent, arrived to conduct the official investigation into the incident. Robert had originally recruited all 3 of the missing men and knew them personally. He examined the clothes left behind in the lighthouse and concluded that James Dockett and Thomas Marshall had gone down to the west landing stage, and the occasional Donald MacArthur had left the lighthouse during heavy rain in his shirt sleeves. He noted that whoever left the light last and unattended was in breach of Northern Lighthouse Board rules. He also noted that some of the damage to the west landing was difficult to believe unless actually seen. From evidence which I was able to procure, I was satisfied the men had been on duty up until dinner time on Saturday, December 15th, that they had gone down to secure a box in which the mooring ropes, landing ropes, etc. were kept, which was secure in a crevice in the rock about 110 feet above sea level, and that an extra large sea had rushed up the face of the rock, had gone above them, and had swept them completely away. Whether this explanation brought any comfort to the families of the lost keepers is unknown. This development did, however, tarnish the lighthouse's reputation for many years after the incident. No bodies were ever found, but there have been some mysterious sights resulting in fascinating national speculation in newspapers and periodically of the era. Implausible stories ensued, such as that a sea serpent had carried the men away, that they had arranged for a ship to take them away and start new lives, that they had been abducted by foreign spies, or that they had met their fate through the malevolent presence of a boat filled with ghosts. The influence of the Phantom of the Seven Hunters was widely suspected locally. More than 10 years later, the events were still being commemorated and elaborated on. One time, a story developed of the existence of unusual log entries. They supposedly have Thomas Marshall saying on December 12th that there were severe winds, the likes of which I have never seen before in 20 years. He also is said to have reported that James Dockett had been very quiet and Donald MacArthur had been crying. Donald was a veteran mariner with a reputation for brawling, thus it would be strange for him to be crying in response to a storm. Log entries on December 13th were said to have stated that the storm was still raging and that all three men had been praying. This was also puzzling, as all three men were experienced lighthouse keepers who knew that they were in a secure structure 150 feet above sea level and should have known they were safe inside. Furthermore, there have been no reported storms in the area on December 12th, 13th, and 14th. The final log entry is said to have been made on December 15th, stating, "Storm ended. Sea calm, God is over all." However, an investigation by Mike Dash at the Fortean Times revealed that the logbooks were fictional and later additions to the story. Subsequent researchers have taken into account the geography of the islands. The coastline of Ellen Moor is deeply indented with narrow gullies called geos. The West Landing, which is situated in a geo, ends in a cave. In high seas or storms, water would rush into the cave and then explode out again with considerable force. It was possible Donald saw a series of large waves approaching the island and, knowing the likely danger to his colleagues, ran down to warn them, only to be washed away as well in the violent swell. Recent research by James Love discovered that Thomas was previously fined 5 shillings when his equipment was washed away during a huge gale. It is likely, in seeking to avoid another fine, that he and James tried to secure their equipment during a storm and were swept away as a result. This theory also has the advantage of explaining the set of oilskins remaining indoors and Donald's coat remaining on its peg, although perhaps not the closed door and gates. Another theory is based on the first-hand experiences of Walter Aldaba, a keeper on the Flannans from 1953 to 1957. He believed one man may have been washed into the sea, but then his companions, who were trying to rescue him, but were washed away by more rogue waves. Another theory is based on the psychology of the keepers. Allegedly, Donald was a volatile character, and this may have led to a fight breaking out near the cliff edge by the West Landing that caused all three men to fall to their deaths. Now, over 100 years later, what happened on that day remains a mystery that has captured the imagination of the public ever since. There have been many books written about the Flannans, and in 2018, the film The Vanishing was released to a worldwide audience. Despite the intrigue and the dramatized speculation of what may have happened, we have to remember 3 keepers lost their lives, and to this day, the families of these 3 men do not know their fate. I just want to give a quick trigger warning on this next story. It does involve injury and death, so please use the timestamps below if you'd like to skip this story. And now on to the story. John Campbell White inherited Overtoun Farm near Dumbarton in West Dumbartonshire, Scotland, after his father, James White, died in 1884. James acquired the farm in 1859 and built the Overtoun House in 1862. His son John planned to extend the driveway of the house across a deep ravine in order to provide easy access to the estate. He hired landscape architect and civil engineer Henry Milner to design a bridge, which was completed in June 1895. Since the 1950s, there have been hundreds of reports of dogs jumping from the bridge, resulting in serious injury or death when landing 50 feet below on the rocks. Around 600 dogs have jumped off Overtoun Bridge, with about 50 of them dying. Locals started referring to the bridge as Bridge of Death or Dog Suicide Bridge due to this strange phenomenon. Various explanations for these deaths has been proposed, ranging from natural accidents to paranormal activity. In October 1994, paranoid schizophrenic Kevin Moy threw his 2-week-old son Owen to his death from the bridge because he believed that his son was an incarnation of the devil due to a birthmark. He said he chose the location due to its association with dark spirits going back to the Druidic days. Following the killing, Kevin attempted to commit suicide, but he was caught and placed in a mental health hospital. In 2004, Kenneth Meikle was walking with his family and golden retriever when the dog suddenly bolted and jumped off the bridge. It survived but was traumatized by the experience. Going into 2005, at least 5 other dogs also jumped over the course of 6 months. In 2014, Alice Trevero, who was walking with her Springer Spaniel named Cassie, reported a strange experience on Overtoun Bridge. I had parked up, and as she is so obedient, I didn't put her lead on. Me and my son walked toward Cassie, who was staring at something above the bridge. She definitely saw something that made her jump. There is something sinister going on. It was so out of character for her. In 2019, Bob and Melissa Hill, the owners of Overtoun House, said that in 17 years of residing at the house, they had witnessed a number of dogs become agitated and fall or jump from the bridge. Bob Hill stated, "The dogs catch the scent of mink, pine martens, or some other mammal, and then they will jump up on the wall of the bridge, and because it's tapered, they will just topple over." Bob, who was originally a pastor from Texas, also stated he believed the grounds on the house are possessed by some sort of spiritual quality. A number of theories have been proposed as to what is affecting the behavior of dogs on the bridge. In 2014, canine psychologist David Sands proposed that the surrounding foliage, giving the in reality extremely steep drop-off of the side of the bridge the appearance of even ground, combined with the residential odor from male mink urine in the area, could be the culprit for luring dogs to jump off the bridge. However, John Joyce, a local hunter and resident of 50 years, rejected this theory, stating that there were no mink in the area. In a separate investigation by the Royal Society of the Protection of Birds, it was found that the side of the bridge reportedly favored by leaping dogs did contain evidence of nests of mice, squirrels, and minks. In a separate experiment, 7 out of 10 dogs exposed to canisters filled with the scent of mouse, squirrel, and mink all went straight for the mink scent, many of them quite dramatically. The Scottish Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals had also investigated the bridge and surrounding area, but their findings prove inconclusive. Some local people think that there is supernatural activity around the bridge and Overtoun House, which could be luring dogs to their deaths because animals are sensitive to the paranormal. Today, the house is a home to a Center for Hope and Healing, a public tea room that serves snacks, home-baked cakes, and drinks. Throughout the summer, there are many guided walks within the house grounds and hiking available in the surrounding area. Theodosia Burr Alston was born to Aaron Burr and Theodosia Bartow Prevost in Albany, New York in 1783, a year after they married. Theodosia's mother was the widow of Jacques Marcus Prevost, a British Army officer who settled in New York City. She had 5 other children from that marriage and was 9 years older than Aaron. Theodosia was raised mostly in New York City. Her education was closely supervised by her father, who stressed mental discipline. In addition to the more conventional subjects such as French, music, and dancing, the young Theo began to study arithmetic, Latin, Greek, and English composition. She applied herself to English in the form of letters to her father, which were responded to promptly. The replies included detailed criticism. Their correspondence numbered thousands of letters. Theodosia Bartow Burr died when her daughter was 11 years old. After this event, her father closely supervised his daughter's social education, including training in an appreciation for the arts. By the age of 14, she began to serve as hostess at Richmond Hill, Aaron's stately home in what is now Greenwich Village. Once, when Aaron was away in 1797, his daughter presided over a dinner for Joseph Brant, chief of 6 nations. On the occasion, she invited physicians David Hozak and Samuel Bard and the Bishop Benjamin Moore, among other notables. In 1801, Theodosia married Joseph Alston, a wealthy landowner from South Carolina. They were the first recorded couple to honeymoon at Niagara Falls. It had been conjectured that there was more than romance involved in this union. Aaron Burr agonized intensely and daily about money matters, particularly as how he would hold on to the Richmond Hill estate. It is thought that his daughter's ties to a member of the Southern gentry might relieve him of some of his financial burdens. The marriage to Joseph meant that Theodosia would become prominent. Her letters to her father indicated that she had formed an affectionate alliance with her husband. The couple's son, Aaron Burr Alston, was born in 1802. Following the baby's birth, Theodosia's health became fragile. She made trips to Sarasota Springs and Ballston Spa, New York, to restore her health. In the spring of 1807, Aaron Burr was arrested for treason. During his trial in Richmond, Virginia, Theodosia was with him, providing comfort and support. Aaron was acquitted of these charges against him, but left for Europe, where he remained for 4 years. While her father remained in exile, Theodosia acted as his agent in the U.S., raising money that she sent to him and transmitting messages. Theodosia wrote letters to Secretary of the Treasury Albert Gallatin and to Dolly Madison in an effort to secure a smooth return for her father. Theodosia's 10-year-old son Aaron succumbed to malaria and died on June 30th, 1812. The resulting anguish affected her health to the point of preventing her from traveling to New York upon her father's return from Europe in July 1812. Unable to join him, she had to wait until December before she could make the journey. Several months after the War of 1812 broke out, Joseph Alston was sworn in as governor of South Carolina on December 10th. As head of the state militia, he could not accompany her on the trip north. Aaron sent Dr. Timothy Green to accompany her instead. On December 31st, 1812, 29-year-old Theodosia sailed aboard the schooner Patriot. The Patriot was a famously fast ship which had originally been built as a pilot boat and had served as a privateer during the war when it was commissioned by the U.S. government to prey on English shipping. It had been refitted in December in Georgetown with its guns dismounted and hidden below decks. Its name was painted over and any indication of recent activity was entirely erased. The schooner's captain, William Overstocks, desired to make a rapid run to New York with his cargo, and it is likely that the ship was laden with the proceeds from its privateering raids. The trip from South Carolina to New York typically took 5 or 6 days. After 2 weeks had passed, with no sign of the Patriot or its passengers, Aaron and Joseph became frantic. They knew that there had been a gale off Cape Hatteras around the 1st of January that had scattered a British fleet. Joseph wrote another mail and still no letter. I hear rumors, too, of a gale off Cape Hatteras at the beginning of the month. This state of mind is dreadful. Immediately following the Patriot's disappearance, rumors arose. The most enduring was that the Patriot had been captured by a pirate and that something had occurred near Cape Hatteras. Notorious for wreckers, who are locals known for rifling standing vessels in often criminal fashion, luring ships into danger. Aaron Burr refused to credit any of the rumors of his daughter's possible capture, believing that she had died in a shipwreck. When a friend offered hope that Theodosia was still alive, Aaron replied, No, she is indeed dead. Were she still alive, all the prisons in the world could not keep her from her father. He sent searchers to Nassau, Bahamas, and Bermuda with no success, but the rumors persisted long after his death. In around 1850, more substantial explanations of the mystery surfaced, usually alleging to be from the deathbed confessions of sailors and from criminals about to be executed. One story, which considered somewhat plausible, was that the Patriot had fallen prey into the wreckers known as the Carolina Bankers, who operated near Nags Head, North Carolina, and were known for pirating wrecks and murdering both passengers and crews. When the sea did not serve up wrecks of their plunder, they lured ships onto the shores. On stormy nights, the bankers would hobble a horse, tie a lantern around the animal's neck, and walk it up and down the beach. Sailors at sea could not distinguish the bobbing light they saw from that of a ship that was anchored securely. Often they steered toward shore to find shelter. Instead, they became wrecked on the banks, after which their crews and passengers were killed. In relation to this, Mr. J.A. Elliott of Norfolk, Virginia, made a statement in 1910 that, in the early part of 1813, a dead body of a young woman with every indication of refinement had been washed ashore at Cape Charles and had been buried on her finder's farm. Writing in Charleston's News and Courier, Foster Haley claimed that documents he had discovered in the state archives in Mobile, Alabama, said that the Patriot had been captured by a pirate vessel captained by John Howard Payne, and that every person on board had been murdered by the pirates, including a woman who was obviously a noblewoman or a lady of high birth. However, Foster never identified or cited the documents he had supposedly found. The most romantic legend involves piracy and a Karankawa Indian chief on the Texas Gulf Coast. The earliest American settlers to the Gulf Coast testified of a Karankawa warrior wearing a gold locket inscribed Theodosia. He had claimed that after a terrible storm, he found a ship wrecked at the mouth of the St. Bernard River. Hearing a faint cry, he boarded the hulk and found a white woman, naked except for the gold locket, chained to a bulkhead by her ankle. The woman fainted on seeing the Karankawan warrior, and he managed to pull her free and carry her to shore. When she revived, she told him that she was the daughter of a great chief of the white men, who was misunderstood by his people and had to leave his country. She gave him the locket and told him that if he ever met white men, he was to show them the locket and tell them the story, and then she died in his arms. Another myth traces its origin to Charles Gayeri's 1872 novel, Fernando de Lomas, Truth and Fiction. Charles devoted one chapter to a fictional confession by the pirate Dominique U, admitting to have captured the Patriot after discovering it demasked off Camp Hatteras following a storm. In Charles's account, Dominique and his men murdered the crew while Theodosia was made to walk the plank. She stepped onto it and descended into the sea with graceful composure, as if she had been alighting from a carriage. Charles wrote in Dominique's voice. She sank, and rising again, she, with an indescribable smile of angelic sweetness, waved her hand to me as if she meant to say, "Farewell and thanks again," and then sank forever. Because Charles billed his novel as both mixture of truth and fiction, popular speculation on whether his account of Dominique's confession might be real, and the story entered American folklore. American folklorist Edward Rose Snow later published an account in Strange Tales from Nova Scotia to Cape Hatteras, incorporating Charles's story with later offshoots. A woman named Harriet Sprague made a sworn statement before the Michigan notary on February 14, 1903, claiming to collaborate details in Charles's novel concerning Dominique's confession. Harriet described the contents of an 1848 confession by pirate Frank Burdick, an alleged shipmate of Dominique's when the Patriot was attacked. In Frank's version, the pirates left most of Theodosia's clothing untouched, as well as a portrait of her. Later, wreckers discovered the deserted Patriot, and one of them carried the painting and clothing ashore. A legend later arose in Bald Head Island, North Carolina, that Theodosia roams the beaches searching for the painting. A popular, though very improbable, local story in Alexandria, Virginia, suggests that Theodosia may have been the mysterious female stranger who died at Gadsby Tavern on October 14, 1816. She was buried at St. Paul's Cemetery with a gravestone inscription that begins, "To the memory of a female stranger whose mortal sufferings terminated on the 14th day of October, 1816, aged 23 years and 8 months." Finally, in 1869, physician William G. Poole treated Polly Man carrying an elderly woman in Nag's Head and noticed an unusual, expensive-appearing oil painting on her wall. Polly gave it to him as payment and claimed that when she was young, her first husband had discovered it on a wrecked ship during the War of 1812. William became convinced the portrait was of Theodosia and contacted members of her family. Some who agreed, though William conceded that they cannot say positively if it was her because none of them had ever seen her. Mary Alston Pringle, who had been Theodosia's sister-in-law, was the only person contacted by William who had actually known Theodosia, and Mary could not recognize the painting as a portrait of her. The portrait is now at Yale University's Lewis Walpole Library. A less romantic analysis of the known facts had led some scholars to conclude that the Patriot was probably wrecked by a storm off Cape Hatteras. Logbooks from the blockade British fleet reported a severe storm that began off the Carolina coast in the afternoon of January 2, 1813, and continued into the next day. James L. Mitchie, an archaeologist from South Carolina who studied the course of the storm, concluded that the Patriot was just north of Cape Hatteras when the storm was in its fiercest. If the ship managed to escape this battering, which continued until midnight, James said, it then faced near hurricane force winds in the early hours of Sunday. Given this knowledge, the Patriot probably sank between 6 p.m. Saturday, January 2nd, and 8 a.m. Sunday, January 3rd. Regardless of all the rumors and speculation, the only fact we know is that the Patriot and all those on board were never heard from again. Circleville, Ohio is an average Midwest small town, best known for their annual pumpkin show that attracts over 400,000 visitors. However, starting in 1976, a darker side unfolded when the residents of Circleville began receiving mysterious letters postmarked from Columbus, Ohio. The handwritten letters were in block-style lettering and contained personal information, accusations, and threats to expose the reader's deepest, darkest secrets if the reader did not comply with the will of the writer. Recipients were being accused of embezzlement, domestic violence, affairs, and even murder. These letters were also sent to elected officials and local newspapers. In March 1977, the main target of these letters was married school bus driver Mary Gillespie. The writer accused Mary of having an affair with married school superintendent Gordon Massey. One letter to Mary stated, "Mrs. Gillespie, stay away from Massey. Don't lie when questioned about meeting him. I know where you live. I've been observing your house and know you have children. This is no joke. Please take it serious. Everyone concerned has been notified and everything will be over soon." Another letter to Mary stated, "Lady, this is your last chance to report him. I know you are a pig and will prove it and shame you out of Ohio. A pig sneaks around and meets other women's husbands behind their backs, causes families and homes and marriages to suffer." The letters to Mary did not stop, and they became increasingly threatening. Even her husband, Ronald Gillespie, began receiving them, and the writer was adamant that Mary and Gordon were having an affair. The writer also threatened that Ron will be killed if he didn't expose his wife's affair. The letter stated, "Mr. Gillespie, your wife is seeing Gordon Massey. You should catch them together and kill them both. He doesn't deserve to live." Another letter to Ron stated, "Gillespie, you have had 2 weeks and done nothing. Admit the truth and inform the school board. If not, I will broadcast it on CBS, posters, signs, and billboards until the truth comes out." The evening of August 19, 1977, Mary was in Florida when 35-year-old Ron received a mysterious phone call from the writer. Ron was investigating the writer's identity and was confident he knew who this person was. He became very upset with this phone call and told his daughter that he was going to confront the Circleville writer. He grabbed his .22 caliber revolver and headed to his pickup truck. He was later found deceased in his truck after he crashed into a tree. His gun was found under his body and was fired once. It was never determined why Ron fired his gun, but raised speculation that he may have fired at the Circleville writer. The coroner ruled Ron's death as accidental when it was discovered Ron's blood alcohol content was .16, twice the legal limit, but others, including Ron's brother-in-law, Paul Fisher, believed he was murdered, stating he was not a heavy drinker. Although Mary and Gordon always denied having an affair, they started dating shortly after Ronald's death, and threats against her escalated. Another letter to Mary stated, "Everyone knows what you have done. If you don't believe us, just make them mad and find out for yourself." Several years after Ron's death, on February 7, 1983, the Circleville writer hung up a sign visible from Mary's bus route containing obscenities regarding her 13-year-old daughter. Mary tried to pull the sign down from the fence, but noticed it was rigged with twine and a box. She took the box home and opened it. Inside was a gun ready to go off. Fortunately, it didn't fire as planned, or it would have killed Mary. Mary immediately took the box to the police, where they quickly realized it was a booby trap. Investigators at Ohio's Bureau of Criminal Investigation recovered the gun's serial number since it wasn't completely scratched off and identified the owner of the gun. The gun belonged to Paul Fisher, who is married to Ron's sister, Karen Sue. Karen Sue confessed to police that her husband had written the Circleville letters. The couple was in the middle of a contentious divorce, and Karen Sue claimed she discovered letters hidden throughout their house. When questioned, Paul denied writing the letters. He claimed his gun had been stolen weeks earlier and agreed to a polygraph test. However, Paul failed the polygraph and was arrested. During his trial, Paul was never charged with writing the letters, even though the judge allowed 39 of the letters into evidence when the prosecution claimed the writing on the booby trap shared similarities to those letters. A handwriting expert testified that Paul's handwriting matched the letters, and after a visit from Karen Sue, Mary testified that she's convinced Paul did it. Paul's employer testified that Paul took off on the day the booby trap was set. However, no one saw Paul at the trap location, and many witnesses stated they saw Paul at home since he was getting work done on his house, and that's the reason he took off that day. The defense also brought up that Karen Sue could be behind the letters and trap since she would financially benefit if Paul went to prison. Regardless of defense arguments, a jury found Paul guilty of attempted murder for the booby trap incident, and he was sentenced to 7 to 25 years in prison in 1984. Paul served 10 years in prison before his release and continued to maintain his innocence. While he was incarcerated, hundreds of letters still continued to be sent to residents postmarked from Columbus, Ohio, and even Paul received a letter while he was behind bars almost 92 miles away in Lima, Ohio. The prison warden declared that Paul could not have sent the letters since he had no access to pens or paper after it was assumed that he was the Circleville writer, and there were times where he was in solitary confinement when letters were sent. Paul's letter stated, "For sure. Now when are you going to believe you aren't getting out of there? I told you 2 years ago. When we set them up, they stay set up. Don't you listen at all. No one wants you out. No one. The joke is on you. Ha ha. Tell no one of this letter. I saw the paper. Great news. Great. The sheriff loved it. Ha ha. Do you believe it now? Do you?" The television series Unsolved Mysteries decided to cover the Circleville writer and planned to visit Circleville. But in December 1993, before filming began, the show received a postcard with an ominous threat that said, "Forget Circleville, Ohio. If you come to Ohio, you sickos will pay. The Circleville writer." This did not deter the show to visit, and Paul, who was recently released at the time, even agreed to be interviewed. He said, "I'd really like to see someone really look at this case, on the letters. Reopen the letter part of it and get in and find out who wrote those letters." Karen Sue was not happy Unsolved Mysteries was in town and did not participate in the program. She did keep track of everyone who participated and even told a family friend that it would be in her best interest if she didn't participate. Karen Sue even sat in her car and took pictures of everyone that entered and left for interviews. From the time the first letter started, Mary suspected fellow bus driver David Longberry of sending the letters, since he expressed romantic interest in her and she rejected him. After accusing David of writing the letters stopped, but later resumed again. One of the popular theories is that Karen Sue is the Circleville writer and set Paul up for her crimes. A former FBI profiler stated that the Circleville writer is someone who is clever, deceptive, and possibly female, who is not highly educated after analyzing this case. Another theory that wasn't brought up in court is that another bus driver who was driving past the location 20 minutes before Mary did saw a large man with sandy hair by an El Camino who quickly turned away and acted like he was going to the bathroom when she looked at him. She looked away and didn't get a clear look, but he did not look like Paul. At the time, Karen Sue was dating a man with sandy hair, and her brother owned an El Camino. Another theory speculates Paul and Karen Sue's son, Mark, may be behind the letters. Mark favored his mother and never visited his father while he was incarcerated. Paul had told others he believed Mark was the one who stole his gun, which is why he didn't report it stolen. On September 11, 2002, 39-year-old Mark Forshaw was found dead in Scioto River of a self-inflicted gunshot wound in Portsmouth, Ohio. Karen Sue told the police her son suffered from years of depression. In 1993, the case took another unexpected turn when a prison inmate named Thomas Lee Dillon sent a letter to the Columbus Dispatch claiming responsibility for the Circleville letters. Thomas had a history of violent behavior and was already serving a life sentence for murder. Authorities investigated Thomas's claim and found several similarities between his writing style and that of the Circleville letters. However, they could not conclusively link him to the crimes, and he was never charged. In 2006, former police officer James Renner began investigating the case. James had grown up in Circleville and had always been fascinated by the mystery. He began to uncover new evidence and interviewed several individuals who claimed to have knowledge of the case. His investigation led him to a new suspect, a former school superintendent named Dwight L. Bowman. According to James, Dwight had a motive for sending the letters as he had been fired from his position as superintendent and had a grudge against several of the individuals who received the letters. However, Dwight died in 2009 before being questioned by authorities. The letters abruptly stopped when Paul was released from prison in 1994 after almost 20 years of periodically terrorizing residents. Gordon Massey died on June 18, 1996 at the age of 63. Paul Forshaw died on June 28, 2012 at the age of 70 and still maintained his innocence. Karen Sue died on May 22, 2024 at the age of 78. Mary Gillespie is believed to still be alive as of May 22, 2024. No one has ever been charged with writing the Circleville letters, but the Pickaway County Sheriff's Office says the case is closed. Thank you, friends, for joining me today. If you enjoyed the stories on this episode, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to be alerted to all future content. If you have a story you would like me to read, feel free to email me your submission for a chance to hear your story on a future episode. Thank you again, friends, for your love and support. I'm Avaria, and until next time, take care.